واحفظه يا ربي بحفظ العلماء واجعل منار نوره إلى السماء. When one star goes, some of the light of the sky diminishes until only darkness remains, and even the guided remain at a loss. So we used to have between 12 and 16 hours a week of in-class time with Shaykh Hassan. The challenge, he took it as an opportunity. He would memorize everything. Even though he's blind, sometimes I'd make an error in reading because there was a misprint. He would say, the same misprint happened 20 pages ago, did it? I was impressed and disappointed with his deep spirituality. Teaching is raising up your students, right? Rather than just correcting them or putting them down. One of the amazing things of Damascus at the time was that if a student had a degree of seriousness, the mashayikh would give a lot of time. They would never, ever accept anything for the class. We ask you for nothing whatsoever for this. Religion is not just what is found in books, but rather it's a lived reality. It's a lived reality. Humanity is desperate for the light, for the life that prophetic teachings come with.
Shaykh Faraz, to start us off, could you share with us the scholar who has most shaped your own journey?
There are many scholars that had a profound effect on me, but one of these scholars is Shaykh Hassan al-Hindi of Damascus. When I arrived in Damascus in 1997, I was very keen to study with the scholars. And there's some scholars I began studying with right away, but there's a scholar that impressed me deeply. He was still relatively young, in his late 30s. He was blind, but a truly brilliant scholar, learned, wise, of very sharp intellect. Some people I knew were studying with him, and I really wanted to study with him. But I was a much younger student, so I spent several months visiting him several times a week, asking him questions. I'd be very impressed by his questions, by his responses to my questions. But I didn't ask him for a class for about 6 months, almost 5 or 6 months, because I wanted to make sure he would say yes. But every time I'd go to him, visit him in his mosque, I was deeply impressed by the way he dealt with the people of the mosque. I also observed how he kept in touch with an extended network of his family, even though he was very busy with teaching and being the imam of one of the large masjids. But between prayers, he would call not just his parents, but uncles and aunts and cousins, and kept in contact with a wide network of people with great love, care, and concern. So that was the first connection, and it had a deep impact on me, just the way he combined deep knowledge, but also a deep connection with his own family and with the society around him at the masjid.
You mentioned earlier how he combined deep knowledge with a profound concern for others. What is something you learned from him that you couldn't find in any book or class?
Shaykh Hassan is known for his deep knowledge and his understanding of books and his deep insight into the Islamic sciences and his ability to understand how this knowledge is to impact the human being intellectually, spiritually, practically, in their life and character. But besides that, when I started going to study with him, I was impressed and disappointed with his deep spirituality. And the reason for that is that getting to Shaykh Hassan's house required a 15-minute walk uphill in the Salihiyya. You had to go past Jami' al-Hanabila and go past this market up the hill to his house. It took a lot of effort. For the first few months, I'd be reading the book, the Shaykh's blind, and he'd be doing his dhikr. And I was thinking to myself that if the Shaykh's doing his dhikr, he's not paying attention to what I'm reading. Even though he would answer questions, etc. But I even got a bit confused and asked one of my mentors that I don't think the sheikh's taking me seriously. I want to cancel the class. And the initial classes were also very short, sometimes just 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And it took 15 minutes up the hill, 15 minutes down the hill. But my mentor, Sheikh Ashraf Munib, said, no, just stick with it and you'll find that things will change. But then I began to appreciate this very practical sunnah to keep your tongue moist with the remembrance of Allah. And then I appreciated that he was paying full attention in class. Even though he's blind, sometimes I'd make an error in reading because there was a misprint. He would say, the same misprint happened 20 pages ago, did it? So I'd go back 20 pages ago, and it was 19 or 20 pages before. So he was paying full attention. But he would remain on remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And his concern, he'd always serve tea and snacks, which is a habit of the mashayikh of Damascus. But just that care and concern was deeply touching. I still continue to visit him at his mosque as well, outside of class. And always he'd ask, how are things and this, that. And he would be very curious about even life things that were going on. There was a rain prayer, Salat al-Istisqa, called at the Umayyad Mosque. It was called by Hafid al-Asad. So I did not go. So I'm not going to listen to this president because he's a criminal. So I didn't go. But Shaykh Hassan asked. And also because it's not a sunnah in the Hanafi madhab to pray, at least according to the way I understood it. So I didn't go. The prayer for rain was in the morning. After Salat al-Jum'ah, I visited Shaykh Hassan. He said, how was the Salat al-Istisqa? I said, oh, there's a lot of people there. And this, that. And there's a number of people, and they're all talking about what they saw and this and that. Shaykh Hassan said, Shaykh Faraz, ذهبت? I said, did you go? I said, there's lots of people there. I said, no, did you go? I said, no. So he made it into a joke, but he taught a lesson, but also gave an encouragement, and he corrected, but in a really beautiful way, which was really powerful. Because one, it was wrong. That if the Muslims are gathering for something, you should go and be pragmatic, even though it's an unjust ruler, but this is for the interests of the Muslims. And he taught lessons, but he said it in a very encouraging way. And that left an impression that to care, because he anticipated. He knew the way I was thinking at that stage in my studies. But so he asked about it. And he got past my hiding the issue, but also he corrected me in a very beautiful way with encouragement. He said, next time, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go. So are you going to try to hide it? I said, no. And said, Mumtaz, and this and that. And he'd bring it up again. So what do we do? I'd explain. So it really appreciated because, that teaching is raising up your students, right? Rather than just correcting them or putting them down. So that was a very profound lesson amongst many.
Thinking back to your time studying with him, how many years did you spend learning under his guidance? And what made that experience unique?
So I spent just 3 years with Shaykh Hassan, but one of the amazing things of Damascus at the time was that if a student had a degree of seriousness and demonstrated some degree of commitment, the mashayikh would give a lot of time. So we used to have between 12 and 16 hours a week of in-class time with Shaykh Hassan at that time. Even though he was teaching in several seminaries and was imam of the masjid and used to give khutbah in another masjid, and people used to come to him after each of the prayers with their questions. His mosque was right at the beginning of a very famous market around Jamia Sheikh Muhyiddin. It's called Souk al-Jumu'ah. But the mashayikh there would give time to students of knowledge. And this was one of the very unique things. So one could have, if one was serious and committed and consistent, you could study in small groups with the scholar, quite intensive. We used to have to ask Shaykh Hassan Sayyidi, we cannot do more. He said, let's read this as well. I said, Sayyidi, you just can't, because we need to prepare, we need to review. And so that was very powerful, especially when they would never, ever accept anything for the class. Sometimes, and partly because I'd get hungry. The class was early in the morning, soon a little after Fajr, and it would be before breakfast time. So I'd pick up some patties or something to take. He said, "Khaliha al-bab, leave it at the door." I said, "See, but we can eat it with you." He said, "No." He said, "Ma bidna shay." Right? We said, "We don't want anything from you." "La nas'alukum alayhi ajra." We quoting what the prophets are mentioned as saying in the Quran, "We ask you for nothing whatsoever for this." And I left a great imprint. Even gifts. Once just a small gift, 1 volume, try to gift it to him. He said, "Don't spoil my intention." He said, "How much was this book?" And he insisted on finding out, and he actually paid me for it. And I had received a discount for the book as a student. He said, "No, it's not that much." He asked someone else, what was the price of the book in the back of the book? So actually I made money by gifting him a book. I got a 20% discount, but he paid for the listed price, just to be cautious. But that left a deep imprint that there's nothing in it for themselves. SubhanAllah.
You've spoken about the incredible life and character of Shaykh Hassan. Could you tell us more about his early background and the teachers who shaped him?
So Shaykh Hassan is from a Damascus family, an established family. He began studying when he was very young. He was obviously very sharp in understanding and intelligence. But from a very young age, right around when he hit his teens, he fully lost his eyesight. But he used to go with consistency to the circles of knowledge. He studied at Mahad al-Fath, one of the top seminaries in Damascus, where top teachers like Sheikh Abdul Razak al-Halabi and Sheikh Adib Kallas taught. But throughout his studies there, he also used to go to private classes, despite being blind. So once he was telling us, once I raced a dog, and I don't know if I was more scared or the dog. I said, "How?" And he was laughing. He said, because one day before Fajr, he was walking to another masjid away from his house and blind, but he knew the neighborhood. So he was walking down the hill, and there's a dog sleeping on the hill. And listen, it's all downhill. So he accidentally stumbled on a dog. He said, "I was in my teen years, so I got afraid, so I started screaming. And I woke the dog, so the dog was screaming. So I was running down the hill screaming, and the dog was running down the hill screaming." And I don't know whose fault it was. Was it my fault or his? Until we reached the bottom of the hill. But despite the challenges of being blind, and despite the challenges of not always finding someone to take him around, etc., he learned how to get around town. He memorized the Quran. He had students who were friends of his, such as our own teacher, Sheikh Basim Aitani of Seeker's Guidance, who would read the texts for him so that he could prepare for class. Others would read the text with him so he could review. But the challenge, he took it as an opportunity. He would memorize everything. The texts, the explanations, memorize the Quran. In 1997 in Damascus, I don't know any of the scholars who had computers. But Shaykh Hassan managed to get a computer even though he didn't have much funds, but he also taught himself to touch type. A lot of the things that are posted on his website, he himself gives the title and the description, etc. So he always has this intellectual curiosity. Even now, when he visited the center in Istanbul, he met Sheikh Hamza al-Bakri. And he said, "Sheikh Hamza, if I were to say that I love you, this would not really be giving you your due. I have, bal ujilluka. Rather, I really deeply respect you." So I inquired later, I wasn't in Istanbul at the time. I said, "How come?" He said, "Because Sheikh Hassan has listened to many of the classes of Sheikh Hamza al-Bakri, even though Sheikh Hamza al-Bakri himself said, 'Yeah, Shaykh Hassan, I consider myself a student of your students.' Because Shaykh Hamza al-Bakri is good 15 years, maybe 15 years younger than Shaykh Hassan, but he studied Hanafi fiqh with some of those who studied Hanafi fiqh with Shaykh Hassan al-Hindi. But it's also an example of beautiful love. Shaykh Hassan, when he saw Shaykh Hamza al-Bakri, praised him that I've benefited a lot from your knowledge. And Shaykh Hamza al-Bakri said, no, but I am a student of your students. And he's listened to many of Shaykh Hamza al-Bakri's classes. And that's part of prophetic knowledge, that it instills humility in one. They're both had deep respect and deference to the other, right? And not sort of posturing with one another and things like that. So that lived example is at least as impactful as the sharp knowledge that they have. Because true knowledge is not just what you know intellectually, but it's what you're able to live practically in your dealings with others. And that's really the challenge of living up to the prophetic example.
Reflecting on what you learned from him, how do you now strive to pass on those lessons to your own students?
So, I mean, living up to those high standards that we've observed from these great scholars is a challenge, but a blessing of having studied with the scholars and spending time with them. And I continued even after leaving Syria to listen to Shaykh Hassan's lessons, of consulting him on different things. Even during COVID, some issues came up about how to pray Taraweeh at home, etc. So I just called Shaykh Hassan, asked him, how should we address these challenges that have arisen due to the lockdown for COVID? But the scholars don't just teach you texts, but they teach you a way to think. So I find myself, for example, when issues come up in Islamic beliefs or in Hanafi fiqh, that how would Shaykh Hassan think about? How would Shaykh Adib Kallas think about this? If I'm introducing a chapter in fiqh, I often find myself trying to structure things the way I've seen Shaykh Hassan, not necessarily on that issue and with what he has said, but they give you a way of thinking, frameworks by which you understand things, but also an attitude, an approach, both to knowledge, but also how to convey it so that it can be clear to the one in front of us.
When you talk about the great impact Shaykh Hassan has had, not only on you, but on many students, what do you think the Ummah loses if scholars like him are left unsupported?
So the Prophet ﷺ said that the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. So the prophetic inheritance is not wealth, it's not power in a material or political sense, but rather it is knowledge, right? It is living, beneficial knowledge connected to revelation and connected with deep concern out of love and mercy for creation. And it is that prophetic inheritance that preserves light, not just for our ummah, but for humanity. Because as one of the great sages of Islam said, that creation is all darkness. It is only illuminated by the manifestation of the real in it. That's spiritually Allah manifesting His attributes, but also in a lived way by the manifestation of the guidance from the most real in it. And that guidance is manifest through the inheritors of the prophets. They are teaching people the good. Right? That's why it's come in prophetic hadith that the people of the heavens and the earth and the ant in its anthill and even the fish in the bottom of the ocean pray for the one who teaches people good. Right? Because this is what preserves good for society, for creation. So having that preservation, that is what keeps good in society. That how do we preserve faith and guidance and good in our ummah? Religion is not just what is found in books, but rather it's a lived reality. It's a lived reality. The Sahaba spread Islam deep into Africa and all the way into to China. But they did not speak any of the local languages. The next generation made Islam reach into India and and beyond, they did not speak any of the local languages. People weren't impacted by their words alone, but that living reality that they had. And that is Deen. That is Deen. That we need that revelation is not just a body of knowledge that you can read and say, I accept. But it is a lived reality, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in the hearts of those who have truly believed. And that's what we lose when these scholars go. The Prophet ﷺ said that the scholars are like shining stars in the dark of night. When one star goes, some of the light of the sky diminishes until only darkness remains, and even the guided remain at a loss in their lives.
Looking back, how do you think the landscape of scholarship and the support systems for scholars have changed since your days in Damascus?
So, when I was in Damascus in the late 90s, things were very difficult for the scholars. There had already been several decades of an unbelieving, corrupt, oppressive, repressive, criminal government that had killed hundreds of thousands of people, jailed thousands of scholars, and scholars were in a very difficult condition economically, even at that time. But at least they were in their own land, and they're able to function even in a limited capacity. And they would lament that these things aren't as they were a generation or two ago in terms of what the scholars were able to achieve. Now things are even more difficult given what has happened in Syria for the last 14 years. We hope that things have opened up significantly now, but their condition is very difficult. A scholar in dollar terms, a scholar teaching full-time now, 28 years since I went to Damascus, makes half of what they would make 28 years ago, even though the cost of living in Syria has increased, even by dollar standards, 5 to 10-fold. So it's very difficult. And they don't have the support of the network of businessmen and traders, etc., that existed even 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago. But certainly the way the Ummah was in its heyday, where there were awqaf, there were endowments supporting scholars, facilitating housing for them. Students of knowledge would have housing. Most madrasas had student housing. Each student would have an individual room, and there would be funding for them. And throughout history, many of the scholars lamented, like Imam Ghazali laments in Ihya Ulumuddin, that if Muslims were truly sincere in their knowledge, more Muslims would be doctors and fewer would be scholars. Because if you wanted to be rich and famous, what would you do? Become a sheikh. Because they were the celebrities and the stars and the people who would be supported for life. But doctors and engineers and architects would struggle because it wasn't so prestigious. The same, but we said it's an embarrassment that you can go to many a city and a Muslim has to go to a non-Muslim doctor, to a Jewish doctor or Christian doctor to seek treatment. Sultan Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, when he got sick, they had to bring Maimonides, Musa ibn Maymun al-Qarnati, from Cairo to the Levant to be the personal doctor of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, a Jewish rabbi. Why? One, because he was the most specialized, but Muslims would go into knowledge. So, but things are different now. Things are different. In Jordan, for example, the people with the lowest grades choose the faculties of Sharia. And even politically, things are structured this way. Because they create the incentives in this way. If you're really smart, you go to medicine, then engineering, then this, then that. If you have basically 0 grades, but really want to go to university, go and seek and become an alim. even then, the Ummah loves the Deen. I have seen across the world amazingly brilliant men and women who sacrifice successful career opportunities, etc., because they care about Allah and His Messenger and His Deen. Even at our Tamkeen program, there's one sister who's finishing off her med school. She was thinking, I'm just going to leave it and study our Mastering Islamic Studies program. But we said, no, finish your medical school and do this program and combine the two. She had offers to go overseas and finish her medicine over there, but she says, no, I'm going to finish this program and then go there. So, but as an ummah, we need to facilitate for the most dedicated men and women to have a clear path to serve the ummah as a whole, to serve humanity as a whole. Humanity is desperate for the light, for the life that prophetic teachings come with. Any land where there is faith, where there's remembrance, where there's sending of blessings on the Prophet ﷺ, where there's people who are breathing with intention, the land rejoices. We know from the Quran that when righteous die, the sky and the earth cries for them because they bring good. Whereas, so we need to facilitate these beacons of light. One of the names of the Prophet ﷺ in the Quran is As-Sirajul Munir, the light-giving lamp. But the nature of the light-giving lamp is that a lamp is used to light the next lamp, and it does not diminish its own light in any way. And that's the nature of what the Prophet ﷺ has come with and what we need to spread in the ummah. Right? We don't focus on we don't spend too much time thinking about the darkness, because you can't do anything about darkness. What you can do is to commit to spread that light, and the darkness is dispelled.
You've shared so many inspiring stories of mentorship and learning. I understand that your organization, Seekers Guidance, has been supporting scholars for over 17 years through initiatives like the Islamic Scholars Fund. Could you share with us how this fund works and the ways it helps preserve and support Islamic scholarship today?
So the Islamic Scholars Fund began informally because we kept hearing about different scholars who are having a crisis. This scholar needs an urgent eye surgery, but they don't have funds. This scholar is about to be evicted because they can't pay their rent. This scholar had a life crisis that they're stuck in. So we started reaching out informally to help scholars who are having crises. But then we realized that we have to do something more constructive, not just reactive, given the state that we've seen scholars be in of crippling poverty. So we started this fund. Supporting scholars and students of knowledge is one of the categories of zakat and of sadaqah. Those in need who are fi sabilillah, who are serving in the path of Allah. Multiple types of individuals fall under that category within the four schools of Sunni Islam. So this Islamic Scholars Fund identifies the most deserving scholars, students of knowledge, and then we found supporting scholars and students of knowledge by supporting select seminaries, by supporting their faculty of teachers and their students, so that they can be freed up to serve their communities, to serve the ummah, and to become the future light-bearing servants for the ummah. And also this frees them up for those critical services. Many of the ulama teach, but they are also doing all kinds of other things just to survive. One of our teachers had started spending most of his day as a driving instructor in Istanbul. Why? Not because he was passionate about teaching people how to drive. He is someone who can teach the highest level books in the Islamic sciences and a person of great wisdom and spiritual depth, but one needs to provide for one's family. So alhamdulillah, we managed to free him up, also take care of his medical circumstances, because he has many medical bills. He was not attending to his medical problems, which required surgery and expensive monthly medication. So he was able to attend to that, but also to free himself up to give time to future generations of scholars, just as I myself managed to get 12 to 16 hours a week of time just with Shaykh Hassan al-Hindi, 12 to 14 hours a week with Shaykh Muhammad Jumu'ah, get many hours a week with Shaykh Adib Kallas and others, and no one would ever take anything for that, which is the spirit of the prophetic way of teaching. It's accessible to anyone at any time. There's a sister from Northern Europe. She came to Damascus, to Istanbul, saying, I've been here for 6 weeks and I cannot find teachers. The only teachers I can find are charging exorbitant rates. And she couldn't afford that. I said, let me ask this certain scholar, are there any female teachers? He said, why should someone else get the reward? If she's serious about learning, I'll teach her. Even though he's one of the busiest people I know, he sat with his sister and taught her one-on-one with his wife present. He covered in 2 weeks, because she was only there for a limited time, he taught her 4 books in 2 weeks. And then his wife, who's also an accomplished female scholar, taught her a number of other books as well. Right? Why? But he was able to do this because he was supported. So he has that time to serve where it's needed. The sister has since run many youth educational initiatives and community service, etc. A niece of mine went to that country, Northern Europe, and she said, Mamujan, that this student of yours, do you know what she does there? I said, no. Actually, she's not actually a student of mine. She's studied with this teacher that I know. I said, she's doing this and this, which that sister had not mentioned to me ever. She consults me once in a while. But that's the power that just that brief contact with this scholar empowered her to have the confidence that I've studied this properly. So she taught youth classes and girls classes and programs in the community and initiated different educational and community building projects through this knowledge. So that's why it is not just about supporting the scholar, but providing the means to uplift our ummah in its faith and its guidance, and having clarity in navigating testing times with clarity and with light.
That is incredible work, mashallah. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us these incredible stories. As we conclude, can you leave us with one line of advice or wisdom that comes to your heart as you reflect on all the teachers who have left a mark on you?
Actually, a line of poetry comes to mind from a wonderful poem called Ad-Du'a al-Nasiri. This was translated into English as the prayer for the oppressed. And this prayer was banned in a lot of North Africa because when the French and the Italians were, oppressing the Muslims in those lands, this was recited across the cities, asking Allah for His assistance and mercy. But in this amazing poem, one of the lines is that Allah grant victory to our Muhammadan religion and make the end of its days like its beginning. وَاحْفَظْهُ يَا رَبِّي بِحِفْظِ الْعُلَمَاءِ, and preserve it, O Lord, by preserving its scholars. وَاجْعَلْ مَنَارَ نُورِهِ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ, right? And raise the pillar of its light, radiating all the way to the heavens. So that's the concern, that we want this light of guidance and good preserved and manifest in the ummah, so anyone who seeks good, who seeks truth, who seeks clarity, who seeks meaning and purpose is able to find it. But the only way they can is not by reading this and that, but by connecting to those who bear that light living in their hearts. And those are the inheritors of the Prophet ﷺ.